Tonight's co-sponsors. So a word about those that are partnering for this. First, the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative helps make this possible. Daniels Fund promotes principle-based ethics when confronting ethical challenges. You can see the principles listed here, which includes integrity, fairness, and promoting the rule of law. Each of these principles are, of course, relevant to this evening's event. Melanie Kay, who is on tonight's panel, is going to be speaking here shortly, helps lead this work within Colorado Law School. Thanks also to Michelle Logan, who's been helpful in pulling tonight together. Daniels has been a terrific co-sponsor of our AI and ethics initiative, of which tonight's event is a part. Additionally, we are also delighted to team up on tonight's event with the Colorado Access to Justice Commission. Thanks to Emo Overall, who is the executive director, who's here with us tonight, and is also going to be on tonight's panel. And further thanks to Jason Lynch. I think your exalted title is you're leading up the tech committee for the Access to Justice Commission, also actively involved in the classroom here at Colorado Law, and Jason helped craft tonight's event. Originally, I said to the extent this goes well, credit to Jason, and if it doesn't, I screwed it up. Exactly. If it doesn't go well, you can blame both of us. We'll change that a little bit. Finally, tonight's event is also brought to you by the Silicon Flatiron Center. For those of you who are new to Silicon Flatirons, we operate, this is a triangle I was creating at, the triangle of technology, innovation, and regulation. That's sort of the through line of everything here at Silicon Flatirons. Tonight's part of our overall series, which is a regular one on artificial intelligence and ethics. This is the second year of that series, and this is our second installment in year 2. In abstention, I want to send a thanks to Margot Kaminsky, who helped launch this series, and credit also to her co-collaborator on it, my colleague Harry Surden, who's going to be moderating tonight's discussion. Harry is really a dual threat on this. He's actually involved in using generative AI prototypes to provide some access to justice, help at, we call it Colorado Law School West, also known as Stanford, where he's doing some of that work. So Harry will probably be jumping in an active way as more of the moderator. Additionally, shout out to Blake Reed, who is Initiative Director at Silicon Flatirons, and Dale Hatfield, also an Initiative Director and old friends. Finally, here's how tonight will work. After a word from Stacy about the course, then I'm going to turn it over to Harry, who's going to lead the panel discussion. That's going to proceed in 3 parts. First, Lois is going to provide some snapshots about ways that technology and artificial intelligence are already being used, in particular in the service of helping address access to justice shortcomings. A note that she is stepping in gamely on 24 hours notice for Joseph, who unfortunately is sick and cannot be here tonight. Second, Jason is going to be forwarding the provocative thesis for tonight that ChatGPT 4 should be admitted to the Colorado bar. And finally, Melanie's going to lead off. She's going to be talking about some of the relevant aspects of the rules of professional conduct that may need to be evaluated if we're going to go down this path. I am delighted to introduce Stacy Pratt, who, as I mentioned, is working on a course here at CU Law. Stacy, tell us a little bit what you're doing.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm so excited to share what we're doing here at CU Law on access to justice and technological innovation. We have launched our own innovation lab, and I'm very glad to acknowledge that one of my students is here with me tonight to tell you a little bit about it. But I think it demonstrates that CU is deeply committed to access to justice and technological innovation, and that we can do both. And I have been profoundly touched, not only by what's happening in my course, but by the dedication and passion my students show for developing legal applications that can help fill the breakdown that we sometimes see in terms of people having access to justice. So to start with, I'd like Tegan, if you could stand up for a second. This is Tegan Ellis, and she used a no-code, low-code platform called Gavel to develop a tool that uses a guided interview. So individuals who are seeking modification in parenting visitation can actually answer just a few questions, and the forms are generated for them, ready to be filed in court. So, Tegan.
Yeah, hi guys. So I really loved creating that tool, but I think something that I really love about the class is the energy and the environment that Professor Pratt has created. It's very open. We're allowed to fail and create and be messy And we kind of take away the kind of that ego of like thinking like a lawyer and all the things you hear in law school, and really think as like community members and how we can take our knowledge of legal things and tell it to other community members in the most effective way, all through the lens of technology. So we've all been really optimistic with that and optimistic about what tech can do.
Thank you so much, Tegan. Tegan has done an amazing job, and my students today are actually doing a usability analysis of a family law triage tool currently being used by Kansas courts to actually triage family law cases. So the possibilities are endless. I can't express how timely the panel is today. You know, when we see the obstacles many people face in accessing justice, we get hope from things like ChatGPT, BARD, and artificial intelligence. And I feel like this is exactly where we should be as a community in answering these questions. AI can democratize the legal services. And I think it's something really great that this panel can contribute. So I'm hoping my class can be part of this future discussion. There are great tools out there. I don't know if anyone has seen the tool Do Not Pay, but is actually a robot lawyer that uses AI to generate questions and answers to all kinds of legal issues. And it's been used 300,000 times. So what I say is there's an appetite for this. There's an appetite for free tools that help people understand the law. But then there's also another side to it. They are currently being sued for the unauthorized practice of law. So I can't think of a better foundation for recognizing the question, should ChatGPT be admitted to practice law? So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, applause. That was great. Thank you. With that, over to Harry.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm Harry Surden. I'm a law professor here and also the director of the Artificial Intelligence Initiative at the Silicon Flatiron Center. So it's such a pleasure to be here, Brad. Thank you for those excellent words, and thank you to Stacy, and also thank you to all of you for coming, and our excellent Silicon Flatiron's team for putting together such an amazing event. We have an amazing set of panelists here tonight. In the interest of time, I will just say their names and their titles, but I encourage you to go online and look at their extensive expertise. To my left, I have Elisa, or Emo Overall, who is the executive director of the Colorado Access to Justice Commission. Next to her is Lois Lupica, the professor of the practice of law at DU. Next is Jason Lynch, who's the general counsel and chief operating officer at Foundry. And last but not least is Melanie Kay, director of the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative Collegiate program. So these are people on the cutting edge of both ethics and technology, and we're extremely grateful to have them here today. So to start us off, we're gonna have Emo say a few words of table setting, what the issue here, and then after Emo, we'll turn it over to Lois, and then the panel will react to Lois's presentation. So Emo, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Harry. Can people hear me? Do I need to, everyone can hear, great. As was mentioned, my name is Emo Overall. Emo's my nickname, but you can feel free to call me that. And I am the director of the Colorado Access to Justice Commission. I am not at the cutting edge of technology or ethics. I am at the cutting edge of the anatomy of this problem. What is wrong? Well, what's wrong is most people can't afford attorneys. Most people can't afford attorneys. And in some cases, in domestic cases, for example, last year in Colorado, 75% of litigants went before a judge in their case without help, without an attorney. How hard could it possibly be, right? So, of course, this exasperates judges because people are trying to put evidence in. Here's my phone, here are the text messages. But it also creates unfair outcomes, right? And it creates especially unfair outcomes for marginalized communities. Civil legal needs are exceptionally common. ILS put out a justice needs study in 2021 that showed 66% of American households experienced at least one civil legal issue in the last 4 years. So exceptionally common. And yet in the most marginalized communities, so low income households, 92% of low income households had no or very little help resolving their legal issue. So it starts to compound. The legal issues become more intense, more serious, and begin to compound with one another. You know, you can imagine a scenario where somebody is, you know, not sure whether they qualify for FMLA, but they don't have any help to get them to see that they do. They end up losing their job because they have to take too much time off. Losing their job makes them start losing income, maybe miss a payment on rent, not be able to qualify for benefits that could be life-altering to secure their family, but it's too complicated and they don't have anyone to help them. Perhaps they're wrongfully evicted. They don't know that, start living out of their car. Suddenly they are 11 times more likely to enter the criminal justice system. Their child is much more likely to be taken away from them if they have a child. And their child also is more likely to enter the criminal justice system. So you see how this snowballs, this lack of help starts to really compound for the most vulnerable populations. So the good news, that's the doom and gloom. And the good news is that there is a very wide range of solutions that are available. And these are just the ones we've thought of, right? Everything from legal aid attorneys to bundled services and more modern types of practice of law to navigators, community partners and community navigators, or I'm sorry, I should say licensed legal paraprofessionals, a mid-level professional, not an attorney, but the nurse practitioner to the doctor, for example. So if in that family law case, it's between having no medical help or having a doctor, maybe a nurse practitioner will do, right? So licensed paraprofessionals, community navigators, court navigators, and then a whole universe of self-help materials, which others on this panel are really familiar with. And then you sprinkle technology onto any one of those, and they become infinitely more powerful. So that's the anatomy of the problem and maybe a brief overview of some of the solutions. And I'll stop talking because I probably have the least to say at this point now. I just want to learn from these guys.
Yeah, thank you, Emo. That's really important. And I think we understand the gravity of the situation thanks to your overview. Let me turn this over to Lois for your presentation and then we'll react.
Okay. Thank you so much. As Harry said, I'm Lois Lupica, and I direct the Law and Innovation Lab at the University of Denver, where we build technology tools that help self-represented people solve their intractable problems. So in the 4 years I've been doing this, we have built about 12 different tools. We build with empathy. We really deconstruct the problem and come up with a solution that works. It was pretty exciting to me last November, at the end of my semester last fall, when ChatGPT came into our world. And my first reaction was, damn, I have a lot to learn about this. So this semester, I started integrating really a ramp-up education for both me and my students. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about both opportunities and risks for AI and the access to justice crisis. And as was mentioned, I was slipped in at the last day because Joe Schaefer was ill, so my thanks to him. He shared some thoughts with me, but I'm responsible for anything I say here. Okay, so the question I am going to discuss in the next 8.5 minutes is how can AI help public interest lawyers, court staff, and self-represented parties? So one of the things that I have found fascinating is AI's ability to generate content. It can be a co-creator of self-help guides. So I have encouraged my students as they're building their guides to, draft a paragraph explaining. So one of the tools we're building this semester is a record sealing tool. So draft a paragraph explaining this criminal provision. And do it at a 5th grade level. And oftentimes we have to go back and re-edit, but it's a good start. It's really helpful. AI is very good at generating checklists. It can identify frequently asked questions and can be trained to create a timeline for a client's case. It can generate images and data visualization. I have not played with that very extensively, but I think there's great potential there. And as I said, AI can simplify language from a 12th grade to a 5th grade reading level, or whatever reading level you're after. We build our tools at 5th grade reading levels. AI can shorten client intake by, as Stacy mentioned, a Q&A chatbot. It can develop a summary and action plan for a client. It can automate documents and court forms. Every single one of our tools this semester, we are automating the JD forms in order to either respond to an action filed against the user, or generate a letter, sometimes a script. AI can write these. AI can translate documents into a variety of languages, and AI can also summarize, as I noted, complex documents. So here's an example. In getting ready for this, I went into LawDroid, which is an AI platform, and my prompt was, write a letter in a formal voice to my landlord, informing him that my apartment has no hot water. And it came up with this without any further prompt. Subject, urgent maintenance issue, lack of hot water. Dear landlord, and I asked, as I said, formal voice, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to bring your attention to a pressing issue regarding the lack of hot water, and so on. It's a really well-written letter. I only gave it a little bit of information, but it took that information and turned it into something useful. Another thing that I did in getting ready for this, I asked one of the platforms to summarize the towing, a provision of the Towing Bill of Rights. So last year we built a tool for people whose cars were subject to predatory towing, and we had to really deconstruct the statute to understand people's rights, and I know the students really struggled with this, and so I asked for a quick summarization of the following. And being as familiar with this statute as I am, it actually did a really good job. Requires towing carriers to document the condition of a vehicle, the reason for towing, and towing it without consent, and so on. Then I asked it to translate the summary of the provision in the Towing Bill of Rights into Italian. I have no idea if this is right or not, but it looks right. And I was going to do it into Spanish because more likely we'd have a Spanish speaker. Well, like now we definitely have a Spanish speaker, but I thought Italian was more fun, and I'm going to Sicily in a couple of weeks. So another thing that AI can do is build documents, automate the filling out of documents. That is a huge challenge for self-represented people. I don't know if any of you have ever had to fill out a JDF form. That's the code that the courts use to designate the forms. They use language which is unintelligible. It's a sea of type, and it's difficult to do even if you're familiar with the legal system. Most people, low literacy, English not their first language, never having been in court, it's a huge challenge. So this semester, we're actually building 3 tools that involve document automation. And it's really an amazing thing when someone just has to answer a few questions and their form is generated. So here's an example of a legal aid organization that's built a tool that puts AI into practice. And this is called the Maryland Justice Passport. And this tool allows users to ask questions in a natural language and receive answers back in natural language. It provides a central place to organize files and documents that are associated with the person's case, keeps track of important dates and tasks, and if needed, helps people find a lawyer. Well, that all sounds spectacular, doesn't it? But, there's always a but, there are significant risks posed by using this technology. And I'm not suggesting that these risks can't be overcome, that we can't use technology, we can't use other tools to work around them, but currently these risks exist. So if a vulnerable person is putting in a prompt and they don't quite know what they're doing, they may receive an answer that heightens their distress. We would like to think that lawyers and other tools that people interact with are sensitive to where they are emotionally at that moment. And typically, we're catching them at the worst day of their life, the day of their divorce, the day they've been evicted, the day that they've been sued on a debt collection action. So the concept of trauma-informed responses, having the tool respond with empathy. We go out of our way to build the tools, the types of tools Stacy works with and the ones that I work on, being very culturally sensitive, making them trauma informed, trying to express empathy with the person's plight, reinforcing the fact that they are not alone. They're not the only person who has been sued on a debt collection action. So there is the risk that AI responses and interactions will feel inhuman and lead to further disengagement with the system. Another huge risk, and I know everyone is aware of this, and there are some really sort of cute ways of expressing when AI goes off on a tangent, which are known as hallucinations. But it's hard for the expert, especially if this is not their particular area, to assess the quality of the guidance. It's even harder for a user, for a direct user. So we don't necessarily know the methods or standards, the way that each tool comes up with its answers. There is the risk that the public will now see this as an expert and rely on it too much. I have a student in one of my classes who uses ChatGPT for everything. And one of my assignments is I have them write blog posts. And you have to pick a topic. I give them 10 topics to pick from on something to do with access to justice. And he clearly turned something into me that ChatGPT wrote, and he did very little editing on. Why did I know that? Because it was bland. It was flavorless. It was not what I expect from my third-year law students. So that's another risk. It may provide out-of-date information. I was looking at a platform that had a disclaimer that said all information is current as of 2021. That's not necessarily helpful. It has the potential to provide biased information or reinforce existing biases, depending on how it's used. And then I think this is always the risk with technology. Commercial tools might out-influence public interest tools. And I think when we're now at the very, very beginning of this very exciting period of time looking at AI, I think you're going to see a lot of commercial actors enter the market and not necessarily recognize the range of users and the situation users are when they access it. So, and then just a few more risks, and I referenced this before, it's really good at providing vague or overly simplistic answers. AI can be overconfident. It has the potential to provide a definitive answer when a good lawyer would say, it depends. Two different systems that have different algorithms may give two different answers. So what does a layperson do with that? And so much of the quality of the answer depends upon the prompt. Related risk is that we have to be mindful of the interfaces if we're thinking about using these kinds of tools that are client-facing. So that's something that I'm very sensitive to, that you want to ensure that people are understanding what your question is so they can answer it in an accurate way so that whatever tool you're building can in turn respond in an accurate way. I think addressing all of these will happen, but these are what I see as some current risks. And so I guess, and maybe this is your job, but I thought I would throw out the question, the issue, as to whether or not artificial intelligence tools how can we ensure that AI tools used on behalf of the public and by the public are accountable, transparent, trauma-informed, fair, accurate, and comply with the laws, rules, and regulations of the United States? So that's my 10-minute presentation, and I'm happy to participate in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Lois. Well, that was a terrific presentation, really fascinating overview of the state of the art about what these new AI tools can do. And I think one thing that was implicit is a lot of these capabilities are new.
Yes.
In the last year, only in the last year or so, can AI start doing it well. In the past, it could do it okay to not well. And we sort of have crossed an important threshold in the last year or so. And I think one thing the students learn from this presentation is if you turn in stuff from ChatGPT, remove the language as an AI language model before you hand it to your teacher. All right, so I want to go over some of the benefits of AI that Lois outlined. She generated a lot of really interesting use cases, and then I want to focus on the risks and some of the reliability issues. So let's start with the benefits. Lois mentioned, AI can be used for content generation, summarizing laws, helping clients understand complex language, filling out complex documents, writing letters. So for those of you who are familiar with the access to justice world, which one of these, if made better or perfected or accessible, would have the biggest impact, do you think? Maybe I'll throw this to Emo since.
I think summarizing the law. I think legal literacy is so empowering, and it is also the biggest gap, right? Because we've made these laws very, very complicated. Want to complicate something, give it to a group of lawyers. So we've made these laws very complicated. We've written them in legalese. Every year I go and plead with the legislature to please just use plain language in your bills. But I think that, yes, if I had to say, I would say that summarizing it so that people just understand, what does this mean? What does it mean for me? I think that would be where I would start if I had to choose. What about you, Lois?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I don't think you can just pick one thing, because solving a problem involves a multi-pronged approach. Having people understand what their issue is and the extent to which there is a law-related or legal solution, and then effectuating the solution by having action items for the self-represented person to take, which often involves writing letters, communicating with whoever, either if there's a dispute, or filling out forms that as I said, are really difficult for people to complete. So, I mean, I think it is going to be amazing, because I don't think we are there, particularly with large language models. I think rules-based AI has got, more of a track record and can be used to really help folks. And we have examples of that.
And one related idea I heard from Emo is maybe empowering power professionals who might help unrepresented individuals who are not lawyers using AI tools. That could be a really powerful combination to serve, and also maybe public interest lawyers. Melanie, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, as I hear about some of these capabilities, I just keep hearing over and over, at least on some of them in my head, this is lawyering. This is lawyering. And, this goes beyond what we've traditionally seen in terms of, help fill out a form or, a self-help kit. The point of, there's this really great new tool and they just got sued for unauthorized practice of law. That's what I keep thinking of in some of these tools and I'll talk about this more during my presentation, but thinking of solutions in ways to ensure that when it does cross over, and goes beyond just summarizing, to practice of law. How do we ensure that accuracy? How do we ensure that reliability, the accountability? And, just in short, even just thinking about, okay, summarizing really complex legal language, sometimes it takes a court decision to understand really complex legal language. And so I worry about, sometimes it's inevitable and almost unavoidable that, statutes are written in really complicated terms to account for all these different variables. And we don't actually know the summary until a court says what it is. And, to have AI stepping in and doing that, I think can be misleading. And so I have concerns about that and those kinds of risks.
Yeah, so this is a great point you raised, shifting it to the reliability point, but also it's sort of a meta point, which is what happens when technology starts interfacing in a way that has traditionally been served by humans. Maybe does ChatGPT become the de facto interpreter of the law in some strange sense in ways that we might feel uncomfortable with as a society? Jason, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, my whole 10 minutes is going to be on this subject.
Oh, okay. So,
where we draw the boundary of practice of law or not, and who's allowed to be on which side of it. I think that this technology asks us to rethink that in a fundamental way. So
yeah, it's a great point, and there are certainly Blake Reed, one of our directors, raised the issue earlier of trust, the ability to trust work product and interpretation. A lot of that, we have to do a lot of work, some of which I'm doing in my own research in terms of reliability and benchmarking. I mean, truth be told, we don't know how good or reliable lawyers are. We don't have any metric for how often a lawyer reads a law and gets it right or wrong, right? We have them pass a series of tests and we send them in the world, and only in the most extreme cases when there's a bar ethics complaint or there's malpractice do we ever see it. But on the day-to-day basis, we don't see if a lawyer reads a complex statute and gives a confident but wrong interpretation, and that would be interesting to see. Any other thoughts on this before we turn it over to Jason? All right, well, let's turn it over to Jason, and then the panel will react. And then after the panel reacts, we'll take a break.
all right, I have no slides, just talking tonight. Yeah, so I don't know if we want to pull down that slide, but I won't need that. AI tools like GPT-4 will be useful to lawyers. There's no doubt about that. Like other technologies such as Westlaw or Lexis that dominate legal research, or machine-based learning tools that are common in litigation discovery, companies will develop tools based on GPT-4 that are going to dramatically increase the efficiency and I think accuracy of legal work. But the capabilities of GPT-4 go far beyond yesterday's technology. For tonight's discussion, I'd like you to take seriously the idea that we should not conceive of GPT-4 and AI simply as tools to make lawyering easier. We should think of these as tools to replace human lawyers altogether. It's not science fiction to imagine that instead of searching for a competent lawyer in a relevant subject matter, assuming you can find one, meeting with a lawyer to describe a situation, receiving analysis and advice from that lawyer, for which you will pay by the hour to get, and having that lawyer take action on your behalf, that a person will simply log on to an online law firm run entirely by AI and will do all of those things for you almost instantaneously and do them for a fraction of the cost. So I want us to consider tonight that GPT-4 can do the work that human lawyers do. Melanie, as you reacted to some of the examples, you said that's lawyering. That indeed ChatGPT-4 should be admitted to the Colorado bar, or should be soon. So in support of this exploration, I want to make 3 points tonight. First, GPT-4 already satisfies one of the most demanding qualifications we place on new attorneys, passing a substantive, closed book, uber final exam, the bar exam. There are criticisms to be made of the bar exam, to be sure, but passing the bar exam remains one of the primary ways we determine whether a person has the legal knowledge and reasoning ability to serve the public as an attorney. According to research reported by the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics earlier this year, ChatGPT-4 took the uniform bar exam and scored in the top 90th percentile. So GPT-4 performs better on the bar exam than many humans who take it. Second, we can see that GPT-4 is capable of doing the work of lawyers. According to Colorado Rule of Civil Procedure 232.2, which prohibits the unauthorized practice of law, the work of lawyers includes the following things, and I quote, counseling, advising, or assisting another person in connection with that person's legal rights or duties, representing another person before any tribunal, or on behalf of another person, drafting pleadings or other papers for any proceeding before a tribunal, exercising legal judgment in preparing legal documents for another person, unquote. As evidence that GPT-4 is capable of doing this work, I refer you first to Lois's examples tonight, and second, to Harry's YouTube channel, where he shows a number of examples of ChatGPT handling legal matters. He shows ChatGPT preparing a legal memo, applying tort law to an accident in a retail store. He shows GPT-4 accurately distilling a series of rules from the federal copyright statute and correctly applying those rules to different fact scenarios. He shows GPT-4 drafting a motion to dismiss in federal court from a simple set of facts. This is the bread and butter work of lawyers. It's preparing pleadings or legal documents. It's providing legal judgment by offering conclusions after applying law to facts. Now, some of you may object that GPT-4 is not ready, that its output is too imprecise or error-prone. It is true that we know of examples of some hapless attorneys who recently used ChatGPT to draft court motions and submitted those papers to court without reviewing them. In those instances, ChatGPT cited cases that didn't exist. It simply made them up. This kind of thing, this type of hallucination, will not persist for long, however. Legal-specific AI tools are already being tested that are based not as GPT is on the entire textual content of the internet, but on verified case law, statutes, and regulations. Legal-specific AI can be fine-tuned to eliminate those kinds of mistakes. Informed observers have been shocked at the speed in which ChatGPT has advanced in its coherence and flexibility. GPT 3.5, for example, took the bar exam and scored in the lowest 10 percentile. Shortly thereafter, as I mentioned, GPT-4 took the exam and performed in the 90th percentile. This technology will continue to improve at light speed. And there is no need for us to wait for perfection. Indeed, human lawyers are error-prone, and our performance is far from perfect. In 2022, Colorado's Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, the body charged with conducting disciplinary proceedings of lawyers, received 3,740 calls or written requests for investigations of lawyers. The office imposed numerous public censures, suspensions of licenses, probations, and disbarments of lawyers after investigating these complaints. To be an improvement over the service that clients can obtain today, the standard that a GPT lawyer must meet is not perfection. It need only meet the basic standard of practice of a population of imperfect human lawyers. Third, and finally, as Emo introduced already, we have an access to justice crisis that human lawyers cannot solve. According to Jim Sandman, the president emeritus of the Legal Services Corporation, quote, "A person has access to justice when they are able to understand their rights under the law, to assert and protect those rights, and to get a fair result," unquote. By that definition, too many people in America today have little or no access to justice. According to the 2021 survey that emo referenced by the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System, 66% of Americans experienced a legal problem in the last 4 years. But only about half of those people reported their problem being completely resolved. As you know, I served with Emo and Lois on the Access to Justice Commission, and last year we released a report based on a statewide listening tour where we heard directly from Coloradans about their legal needs. We heard from individuals and families who regularly deal with important legal matters whose outcomes can have life-altering and profoundly destabilizing consequences. These matters include child custody, divorce, home eviction, protection from domestic violence, and access to essential government benefits, among other things. We heard how often Coloradans face seemingly insurmountable obstacles when trying to deal with legal problems like these. One of the biggest challenges is the lack of lawyers. Large portion of this country are legal deserts where there are not enough human lawyers to serve people's needs. A 2020 study by the American Bar Association found that in 40% of counties across the country, there was less than one lawyer per 1,000 people. And the ABA study found that here in Colorado, in 28 of our 64 counties, there were less than 10 lawyers total, and in some cases, no lawyers at all. In our legal system, representation by a lawyer is essential to understanding your rights, protecting and asserting those rights, and obtaining fair outcomes. Yet we have a persistent structural civil justice gap, in part because a lawyer is not available to everyone who needs one. Even if you live in a place where there are lawyers, their costs may be a barrier to access. The AI lawyer can be a solution to this crisis and help restore confidence that the rule of law applies equally and fairly in our communities. Now, I realize that this call to action may be a call to act against our self-interest lawyers in the room. Embracing AI lawyers may undermine the livelihood of human lawyers. I note, however, that our profession has proved adept over the centuries at protecting our monopoly. The Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure seem to have anticipated this very historical moment. Rule 232.3C presents a list of activities, each of which constitutes the unauthorized practice of law and which are therefore prohibited. The list of prohibited activities includes, quote, owning or controlling a website, application, software, bot, or other technology that interactively offers or provides services involving the exercise of legal judgment, unquote. It is clear then that, at least today, AI lawyers are illegal in Colorado. Well, what justifies this technological exclusion? What is it, after all, that human lawyers do for their clients that AI tools cannot? We must wrestle with these questions now, even if one feels that AI is not quite ready to represent a client. Because if we cannot identify the essential human element required for the practice of law, then by prohibiting AI from delivering legal services, we are depriving millions of Americans of access to justice, we are subverting the fair resolution of disputes, and we are undermining the rule of law. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Jason, for that fascinating and provocative discussion about AI and the practice of law. I heard a bunch of themes in there that I'm going to send to the panel for their reaction. I heard one theme about reliability, ensuring that and this is a theme that Melanie echoed, we want to make sure that these systems are reliable, and some of the research that's going on that I'm involved with and others in terms of comparing the outputs of lawyers and some of the most advanced systems. And I want to say, in terms of the state of the art, a lot of these technologies need to be based upon the state of the art system, which is currently GPT-4 by OpenAI, but these systems are likely only to get better. And as you indicated, right now they can sort of do a pretty good job on easy legal issues, according to my research. They still struggle with some of the harder, more complex cases, but we can imagine GPT-5, GPT-6 down the road, they will get better. So distinguishing the technology limits of today, of the moment, with the technology limits of the near future, misuse versus use, right? You can always misuse technology the way the lawyer in New York and Colorado did. I always say you don't want to turn in a draft by a first-year associate to the judge. You want to double check that if you're a partner, but that's essentially what they did. And also access to justice and some philosophical issues. But before we get to that, let me just see if there are any raw reactions from the panel. I saw people writing some notes. Lois?
Yeah, I mean, one of my raw reactions is the status quo that people I have heard are against using AI at all is really horrible for most people. So I don't see why. I mean, I agree with just about everything that you said. I think we need guardrails on people. I think we need to ensure that systems are reliable, that there's some kind of accountability built in. But I just don't understand why we would so ferociously fight to keep ChatGPT out of the bar, because the bar's not doing the job.
Emo, you seem like you've got
Vigorous
thoughts.
head nods there. You're not going to catch me disagreeing at all. I think it was interesting, the quote from the director of LSC saying that access to justice includes knowing and understanding your rights under the law. And yet, you need an attorney to do that, and sometimes you need a judge to do that. I feel like we have an ethical obligation to do better. It's not in our rules of, it's not in our rules of ethics now, but, in criminal law, not knowing what the law is not an offense, right? But we have these laws that can't be understood without a, decryptifying person or court. And we have to do better. Imagine if, the barber profession, imagine if 75% of people couldn't get a haircut, right? Like, because the regulations were, such that we couldn't access that. It would be appalling, right? It would not be okay. So, I think either the rules need to change or something's got to give, but I'm really looking forward to Melanie's rebuttal.
Well, just to sum up a little of what you said, so I'm hearing from some of the panel is we have a system that has a lot of barriers, but they may not necessarily be there for particularly good reasons, and sort of lawyers are meeting the system where it is, but maybe we should be thinking about changing the system unless there are good reasons other than, say, protectionism, legal is. But I think maybe, Melanie, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I feel like you've got some intuition that there are some good reasons behind lawyering and, the human side.
Yeah, well, I really like your point, Emo, that when you look at the bigger ethical dynamics here, it's highly unethical, the current system. It's not fair, and looking at, using ethics principles as sort of teasing apart challenging dilemmas like this, it's not fair. And it is, a huge crisis, and it's a really unfortunate part of the American legal system that I think makes us stand out in a really negative way. The lack of help that we provide, especially to civil litigants, and I think the fact that we support criminal defendants more isn't always a great answer. Some of the same risks are at stake in terms of, life, liberty, freedom, getting your children taken away and not having any help, in court. I mean, it's to me highly unethical, the status quo. And so, I think then comparing some of those values then on the other side of, okay, how can we use these tools in a way that's reliable, that's safe? And, I agree with the point, out there. I think a lot of, well, some help is better than nothing, but it has to be help, I think, that's backed up in some respect by a quality control measure. I don't think it's impossible, But, you know, the kind of analogy over to nurse practitioners of, you know, it's a more affordable, easily accessible way to get medical help. We forward on cases that are really difficult to a doctor if we need to, but it means a lot more people get seen and treated, and that fills that void. And I think there are ways to do that here, and especially to the point of this technology just keeps getting better and better, and maybe the things that we're worried about today aren't even going to be a concern in 3 months with the pace that this is going. But I do think there has to be that accountability backstop, and I don't think it's impossible to come up with an answer for that. But to your point, Jason, of, you know, people aren't perfect either. It's true, but we do have a mechanism now for holding those people accountable through our disciplinary process. AI doesn't care if Jessica Yates goes after them. And so what can be that backstop where we don't have the ability to disbar AI or to, you know, publicly sanction them when we need to, when they mess up and cause someone actual harm. I mean, even just things like getting a statute of limitations wrong, you know, in a spit out answer, it might be a complicated question, it gets it wrong, and all of a sudden someone loses their ability to, you know, solve their problem in court. And so what can be the answer for that person who just lost that right because of a mistake?
Yeah, those are all really good points. And what I'm hearing a little bit is we've seen a lot of techno-solutionism and techno-optimism before in the past, where people have promised, here's a technology, it'll solve all your problems. And then when we see it played out, it's not as good as it looks. And we've definitely seen this in AI in particular a lot. So there's good reasons to be skeptical that, you know, despite my YouTube channel, if we put it out there in practice, it, you know, might be more complex or cause more unanticipated risks than we might have seen. So those are great points. Lois?
Yeah, so I agree that AI can replace some lawyers. I don't think AI will replace all lawyers. And maybe that's where the accountability piece comes in. You know, the extreme case of the lawyers in New York who didn't read their brief or double check. I mean, that's just bad lawyering. And so maybe that's the backstop, that, you know, a lawyer has to look at what's produced and assess it and use their judgment. But, you know, that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes versus 6 hours. Suddenly becomes much more affordable, and it, you know, firms' business practices can change dramatically.
All right, Jason. Yeah, two things. One is I could certainly see us applying to the purveyors of AI legal tools the same type of liability structure that we apply to lawyers who make mistakes. But let me offer what I think so far that I can come up with is the best rebuttal to my assertion. Because I've been really wrestling with this question. I kind of want the profession to wrestle with it, which is really, what is it that human beings need to do in the work of lawyering that an AI can't do? And notwithstanding all of the really impressive examples, one thing that lawyers do, I think, when they are at their best and serving their clients their best, is they are a trusted guide to difficult, emotional, risky situations. And one thing I haven't seen yet is good examples of AI answering the question, what should I do? Right? We're seeing lots of interesting technical applications, certainly as lawyers, producing a lot of legal type output. But having a person ask the question, well, what should I do? I don't see it embracing that yet.
Yeah, you raised some really good points. So back to your first point, in terms of some sort of backstop for the tools, we do see an analogy here in TurboTax and tax software where if they make a flat out mistake, they will backstop it in terms of various insurance. So maybe we require something like that or some sort of regulation. And TurboTax is already a form of AI lawyering in the tax realm. To your second point, I think it raises a big philosophical question is, even if AI becomes as reliable as a lawyer, do we necessarily want to, as a society, have human lawyers with their empathy and advocacy being replaced by computers, and that's sort of, what are we losing in terms of humanity and advocacy? And I'll throw that out to the panel.
Yeah, I think you raised it. You know, the word I was thinking of as you were talking about this was empathy, and that's this innately human, skill that we bring, that good lawyers bring to their representation, not just, for the purpose of making our clients feel better or for, helping them or being there for them, but also because sometimes understanding their goals requires just really listening, empathizing, and helping to redirect them when their goals aren't actually what they might think they are. And so I think sometimes the best counsel is actually, you don't want to sue over this. This is not the best idea to reach your goals. Let's figure out other ways to solve your problem, to kind of, for you to feel better about what just happened to you, and maybe more efficient, certainly more cost effective. And so that human element of empathy, problem solving, listening skills, I worry about that as well.
So you've all highlighted something, which is that law is not just about getting accurate legal answers. It's about getting support and advice. In the same way, we probably wouldn't want to have GPT-4, answer a medical question about a life-threatening illness. We would also want to go to a doctor to help us process and support that. Any reactions?
I think that's the best rebuttal to Jason's Jason's argument yet. I mean, being able to listen and, as a human, redirect. I volunteer for a virtual pro se clinic, and people have 15 minutes with a lawyer. It's not a lot of time, but oftentimes the resources that we direct them to are not legal resources at all. And the best help that we can give them is just to listen to the injustice of what happened, and that's what makes them think they have a legal question or a legal issue, but really the remedy isn't legal at all.
Well, and this gets to your point, which is there something short of lawyers charging $500 an hour where there are humans involved, maybe supported by AI, that might kind of serve access to justice means while also bringing some of that humanity. So there might be some middle ground we're not considering. Jason, nicely done rebutting yourself. That was impressive. Great. Okay.
Lawyer.
Yes, you're a good lawyer. Excellent. It's at the time where we're going to take a 10-minute break. So please come back in 10 minutes and we'll resume with panel 3. Well, welcome back. We've already had a really interesting panel so far, and it's only going to get more interesting with the presentation by Melanie Kay. Melanie is a well-known ethics expert, and I'm really interested to hear what Melanie has to say. So, Melanie?
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me, and to everyone who helped set up this amazing event. So my name is Melanie Kay. I teach legal ethics here and also direct our Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative Collegiate program here at Colorado Law. And I want to highlight again the Daniels Fund ethics principles and the role they can play in sort of evaluating these types of ethical dilemmas. And I'll reference these again throughout my remarks. So I'll start with reflecting on what I've heard so far and what I know about this technology through this series, and especially Harry's talk last time. And my general reaction when I don't have my legal ethics professor hat on is, yay, this is awesome. It's amazing how far this technology has come, the capabilities that it has, the potential for problem solving it offers. And what stands out incredibly to me is just the pace at which it's evolving. And to hear, in a profession where things tend to operate fairly slowly, to hear about the pace of advancement. And in Harry's talk on the first installment of this series, to hear someone say, well, when I wrote on this, however many months ago, I had very different critiques. A lot of those concerns have gone away. And it's now capable of things that we never thought possible. And that just keeps continuing to happen as we have heard from the panel, and that, to Jason's point, that some of our concerns we're going to be able to fix very quickly, which is great and reassuring. But it's sort of ironic for me to be doing this talk with a yay technology slide, because personally, I've always been a bit hesitant with it. I'm the opposite of an early adopter. I'm an incredibly late adopter. And so I will therefore warn you that the rest of this talk, as maybe some of my remarks indicated, I get the wet blanket award here. We're going to talk about risks and rules. And so this award is given to Melanie for being a stick in the mud about technology and, very nervous and, kind of hovering in the corner saying, but what if, but what if? So in the mindset of, okay, but what are the rules? How do we follow the rules? I will be bringing up a few of the Colorado rules of professional conduct that operate in this area and how I think they may apply as we charge forward with some of this technology. And really, to the point that Emo made about how necessary help is in this sphere and how dire the access to justice crisis is. And so it's not that I'm a wet blanket in the sense of let's not do this, because there are always going to be some risks with it, but how do we do it correctly? How do we do it fairly? How do we do it with integrity and with accountability? So Jason had already mentioned some of the points I was going to make about the practice of law and kind of completed the circle of my argument for me, which is that this really feels like the practice of law. And I think it's not super controversial to say that, looking at some of these definitions here in Colorado. Of course, it's always hard to give an all-inclusive definition, but generally it's one who acts in a representative capacity, protecting, enforcing, defending the legal rights and duties of another, counseling, advising, and assisting in connection with these rights, and in our court rules, furnishing legal counsel, drafting documents and pleadings, interpreting and giving advice with respect to the law. So really, from what we've seen and the capabilities of ChatGPT, it is able to do a lot of these things. So why are we so concerned about unauthorized practice of law? Like, what is this? Why are we so protective of the way that we practice law and who we allow to do it? The kind of better sides of unauthorized practice of law are really about quality control and about public protection. As I mentioned, there are rights that you can lose from a bad lawyer, and you're not able to get them back. So we want to be really careful, especially with tools that are going to be offered to people who don't have the benefit of a lawyer to safeguard them. These things have to be pretty accurate, and we want to make sure that people, that something is better than nothing is, but it has to be good. However, the downside of UPL is, of course, that it can inhibit access to justice, and it certainly has had that negative effect, creating that lawyer monopoly that is often criticized. And an added challenge here is that there is a lack of uniformity across states in how states define the practice of law. So a lot of these tools, which aren't necessarily state-specific, how we deploy them in different places might mean different things in terms of the practice of law. While it's generally not UPL to provide informational publications, these generic self-help kits, legal forms without legal advice, a lot of the technology is now certainly crossing beyond that. And even the existing ones that have managed to operate kind of in this gray area have gotten in trouble. LegalZoom is a great example where, they have all these disclaimers on the front. This isn't legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a computer, whatever. But they've been sued in multiple states, and it hasn't entirely been settled which of their services really cross the line. So I think, it's not super controversial to say AI services, at least some of them, are likely going to be deemed the practice of law if they are doing things like evaluating claims, interpreting law to specific facts of the case, drafting motions, offering recommendations based on interpretation of the law. And so what we have is then this ChatGPT as a lawyer offering legal services. And as I mentioned, the problem here in terms of accountability is that AI does not care if it gets sanctioned. It doesn't care if its name gets published, in the legal news and it's not embarrassed. So where is the accountability then? And so I would like to propose that it makes sense to have some form of backstop. I think it could make sense to deem a software publisher as the entity engaged in law practice to ensure that quality control and public protection is met. And, you know, for all kinds of principles, including accountability, trust, transparency, fairness, we want these AI tools, particularly those that are intended for people that don't have separate legal counsel, to be offered by lawyers or law firms who are subject to the rules of professional conduct. So there is that kind of quality control, you know, trust but verify model going on in the background. There's potentially a model here. We have done kind of nuanced things like this before. We have unbundled representation where lawyers can be responsible for a segment of a case or a representation, but not the whole thing. Limited scope representations. Here in Colorado in 2023, we approved limited licensure of paraprofessionals to aid in domestic relations matters. They're taking a separate exam. They're responsible for certain elements of the case. They can pass it off if it gets complicated, kind of like the doctor model I mentioned. And perhaps we could put software through some kind of, you know, quality control, whether it's licensing or review. Maybe every 6 months it has to undergo a stress test, you know, and feed it certain tests and see what pops out of it, how accurate is it. We could even do that on the empathy side, you know, of a client comes and says these things. What is it saying to them in response? And how is that coming out? And then we have lawyers on the back end kind of tweaking and checking and updating as we go. So I want to talk about some of the rules that come into play here. And, you know, of course, we want these tools to be competent, but on the flip side, and perhaps, you know, maybe not what we think of, competent lawyers should keep abreast of changes in the law, its practice, changes in communications and other relevant technology, and engage in continuing study and education. So there's a model for this. We're supposed to be doing these things, thinking about new tools, how we can use them, how we can be more effective, and how we can help more people. However, we have to understand the limitations of this technology, especially again, when we're offering them to vulnerable populations who may not be able to check these things on their own. And again, we reference the lawyer from New York who it sounds like heard about ChatGPT from his college-age kid, used it to write a brief, you know, got a whole bunch of bogus case citations, did not check them. And then when kind of challenged on it, when people started realizing these cases don't seem to exist, he went back and asked ChatGPT, are these sites correct? And it said, yes. And he said, good enough for me. So we obviously want better checks verification to make sure that we can rely on what is being produced. And what are the concerns? Of course, you know, now hallucination is a problem. Ideally, I don't want my lawyer hallucinating, at least on the job. You know, and even if this is a problem that gets fixed and is better and better, there are other problems that can come up that we worry about where we don't want to just kind of let it run wild. So other rules that come into play here that I think can be instructive or helpful in thinking about how are we going to approach this problem. There are already rules in place that can kind of serve as a guide for how we're supposed to do this. We already have rules in place about how to supervise people. In this case, it's people, but there's no reason it can't extend to non-people. Under Rule 5.3, there are rules about, you know, how do we supervise non-lawyers? We have to make reasonable efforts to ensure their conduct complies with our professional obligations as lawyers. And those lawyers, the supervisors, can be held responsible if others don't live up to those responsibilities and we're supervising them. Comment 3 of that rule says when using such non-lawyer assistance services, you have to make reasonable efforts to ensure the services are provided in a manner compatible with the lawyer's professional obligations. So we could do this. We could imply this model of supervisory responsibility to AI technology, again, through some form of oversight, licensing, whatever it may be. Another relevant rule here is our obligations of candor and honesty. We have an obligation to make sure anything we present to the court or say to other people in the course of our representation is correct. So we check stuff, right? We do site checks. We double check the facts. We make sure that anything being filed with the court is correct, or that we know the software is doing it and we're checking, you know, to make sure that accuracy is there. It's also professional misconduct for a lawyer to engage in conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. We don't want fake citations now floating around in the record that somebody could find later, misuse. So obligations there to be careful about the, you know, kind of correct information honesty, and candor. Another area that we need to think about that I think hasn't come up so much yet is the obligation of confidentiality to clients. Where we are using LLM prompts to get an answer from ChatGPT, sometimes to get a good answer, you have to feed it a lot of information about the client. Here's the specific facts of what happened. Here's how they got injured. Here's what we're trying to make an argument about. A lot of that is highly confidential, mental impressions of lawyers, strategy, things like that. Is this going to be used somehow by the platform? Could it be spit out by accident later on, and all of a sudden it's using your client's confidential information and revealing it somehow later on? There's probably safeguards and answers for this, but our obligations as lawyers are to make reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of client information. We need to take reasonable precautions when we're transmitting communications that includes information relating to the representation of a client to make sure it doesn't fall in the hands of unintended recipients. But again, this isn't, a complete stop here. We've figured this out in other contexts with technology. When we all switched to electronic communications and emails, there were a lot of questions. How are we going to keep this safe? How can we keep this confidential? We came up with answers. We came up with safeguards and ways to protect information. Same with legal research tools, with cloud storage. So we can figure these things out. It's just important that we think about them and we do it before kind of unleashing this on the public. Another area that I think has come up a bit is discrimination and bias that can be inherent in some of these platforms. Here in Colorado, under Rule 8.4G, it's professional misconduct for a lawyer to engage in conduct in the representation of a client that exhibits or is intended to appeal to or engender bias against a person on account of race, gender, religion, national origin, disability, age, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. And the concern, that has been highly publicized with ChatGPT, other platforms, is bad data in equals bad data out, right? So when we have biased training data, when it's scraping things from all over the place, it has the potential to put out bad biased outputs. We can't have biased discriminating outputs going to users of this or being submitted to courts. So again, more safeguards, needed to make sure that that's not happening. And again, I think all of these rules kind of set up for us, what are the things we need to be worried about as responsible legal professionals? Let's hold the platforms accountable the same way we would hold lawyers accountable. And I think it's important to note, judges are already taking proactive steps in this realm. Some courts in kind of standing orders are requiring disclosure if AI has been used at all in preparing a filing. Others are saying, tell us which specific tool you used. Others are requiring certification that all citations have been checked and verified if AI has been used. So, I think regulation and oversight of this is coming and we can figure it out. It's just important that we do. And I know all over the place, and especially here in Colorado, we have great people working to solve some of these problems so that we basically get the best of both worlds, where we have better access to justice, in a fair, accountable way. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I love the way you tied each of these points back to specific elements in the current ethical rules that are designed to protect the public and ensure fairness, safety, accuracy, and quality control. So that's a really interesting way of looking at it through that lens. So let me just turn it over to the panel to see if you have any broad reactions, and then I've got some specific questions.
One thing that I really like is your suggestion about thinking about publishers potentially, or at least those who are providing the platform, as having some kind of responsibility and liability, because I think it's easy to forget in a discussion like tonight that AI isn't some, individual entity. It's a product of a company. And those companies have their own incentives and goals and objectives. And so whether it's confidentiality or bias, I think those are really important risks for us to be thinking about.
Yeah. I think the point you made about, as drafters of these rules, we've had to grapple with new developments. And I was the reporter for Maine's Ethics 2000. And I remember spending an entire afternoon talking about inadvertent faxes. And boy, that stumped the committee. But it's, you know, it's the same kind of thing. It was so alien to us. Like, what do you mean? How could the fax come in? So I think we have to go through a similar exercise now, looking at, you know, different advances in technology.
Yeah, and I think it's that, you know, we can do hard things.
Yeah,
We've
yeah,
done it
exactly.
before.
We've done it before.
We can do it again. We should just do it.
Emo, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I really like the concept of supervision and, you know, how can perhaps we build into the rules a supervisory role for attorneys with AI? I mean, we can actually set that blueprint up, right? If we want the best of both worlds.
There's an interesting point. So one thing I think we all agree on is quality control. I think what makes the landscape a little bit more complex is we have, you know, private sector AI systems like from OpenAI, like GPT-4. We also have open source systems that are getting more and more powerful, such as Llama 2, released by Meta. We'll probably have a Llama 3 and a Llama 4 that will be, you know, next year, that will be as powerful as, you know, GPT-4 this year is. So that's interesting. And then we also have legal specific tools versus general AI systems. So Open GPT-4 is just a general system. It can give you a pretty good answer about just about any topic on earth, whereas there is also legal tech startups that design things specifically for the legal space and might have better ability to create boundaries and safeguards around legal products. So all of that complicates the landscape, but as you said, it's not unsolvable. Let's do the hard work to get it solved. I want to throw in a question by, again, our friend Blake Reed, our director, who likes to throw provocative questions. So what I took Blake's question to be is, a lot of this has been talking about getting more good law and good legal answers, but maybe we should be thinking, are we getting more justice, fairness, real world problem solved and hardships alleviated? So those two things can be the same. The law, getting good legal answers, can often be a means to an end, but it's not necessarily so. But are we too focused, you know, everything looks like a nail when we've got a hammer, when we're missing the actual problems in the world by hyper-focusing on law and legal answers. So let me throw that out to the panel.
The panel of hammers.
Yeah, the panel of hammers, exactly. I mean, so, you know, yeah, Jason.
Well, I guess I would say, I don't think that more accurate, better legal answers certainly solves the access to justice concern that a lot of us share. I mean, it's helpful and important, and it does fill some holes that are missing today, but so much of this is also about conflict and challenges and opportunities that are non-legal in their essence. And so it's certainly not AI, as you were alluding to earlier, it's not the solution to everything, for sure.
Right.
But I think non-legal is different than law-related. So, you know, poverty doesn't have a legal answer, but it has a variety of law-related things that you can do to address individual elements of someone's problem when the fundamental problem is a dearth of resources. So, I think you're absolutely right. The legal answer isn't always the answer, but sometimes it's knowing what you can stand up for yourself about and challenging the way public benefits are administered. I think there are creative uses for this tool coupled with other technology tools that we haven't even imagined at this point.
Yeah, and what I like about GPT-4 is that it doesn't think about the world in this binary fashion that we do as attorneys. Is this a legal question? Is this not a legal question? But, you know, it uses the universe of information out there to do its best. And that might actually be an advantage. I know that very soon companies are going to come up, legal companies are going to come up with powerful tools. I worry about that because if this is a, democratizer, how do we stay in the game and not, get outpaced? I think you mentioned that too in your
Yeah,
slides.
the commercialization of this so that it also becomes out of reach. to
We should
people.
not assume that it's a democratizer. I mean, where I sit, which as you alluded to earlier, my day job is as general counsel of a venture capital firm. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being funneled into companies right now to develop AI products. They are not focused on access to justice challenges, these companies. I mean, one interesting example I learned about last week is a product called Harvey, which I don't know if you've encountered this. It's a very well-funded AI startup that is working right now exclusively with large, sophisticated law firms. It's building platinum-grade, luxury AI tools for those who already have those resources in the legal system.
Yeah, this is a great point. I mean, this AI could accelerate the divide rather than help bridge the gap, or the divide will get smaller, but the gap gets bigger as it gets outpaced. So it's a really good point, which might lend some urgency even more to at least having some of these tools available to the public. Melanie, one of the points I really like that you made is this analogy to supervising law students, and this again ties it back to Emo's ideas about maybe having, releasing some of these ideas under the supervision of these technologies under the supervision of lawyers or even paraprofessionals, right? And that might be our easiest, best entry rather than releasing it directly to the public before we know about quality control. We have some experts validating it. What are thoughts about, I mean, Melanie, you brought it up. What are your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I think, particularly as a transition, it's helpful. Companies that have tried to offer legal self-help tools that crossed over into UPL specifically got in trouble because they were companies founded by non-lawyers. There's been instances of that. And so part of the problem there is like the people producing the software don't even really know if it's violating some of these rules of professional conduct. And so I think it's a great way to bridge this gap to say, lawyers should be aware of the professional obligations. Those should be the same for this AI platform. Let's keep, watching it, observing it, making sure that it doesn't violate these rules. And maybe we won't need it forever, but I think it's important to have that backstop. Again, particularly where you have people using it who aren't able to run their own site checks, to triple check the work. And so someone should be doing that. And so I think it's kind of a good model.
Lois, did you have a thought? Oh, okay.
Ivan out in the audience, I think it's Ivan, we were just chatting at the break. He was saying that he uses an analogy in of the medical field. Wouldn't you want your doctor to be assisted by AI, right? Wouldn't you want AI to kind of double check or make sure, did you think about this? Did you think about that?
There's a really interesting challenge for those of you who are, in the academy here. And there's an intuition, I think, in the private law firm world that pretty soon this tool will be able to do the work that first through third or fourth year associates do today. And you can be sure that law firm partners, and I was one for many years, are not going to keep around highly paid young lawyers to train them up over time. And if this happens, if there's a replacement of kind of, more simplistic or early stage type legal work, there's going to be a real training vacuum. And we may find it harder to train up and have enough experience for the next generation of lawyers to really assume roles in serving the public.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think that sometimes happens, and we'll see whether there is some sort of, or the alternative is they just have the first to third year associates do other things that the AI can do, but you're absolutely right. In the last 15 minutes, let's turn it over to the audience for some questions. Oh, we've got a A lot of questions. Let's take it to wisdom here. There's a microphone coming your way.
Hey, thanks everybody. And it's really heartwarming to hear all the empathy for underrepresented population. When I think about the differences between humans and AI, I generally think of three things, AI only having one. And first is our emotion, our drive, what's important, our empathy. And then we have our intellect. And then we have our self-awareness. And it seems like, to me, like what y'all have been talking about is a lot of what we lack is what AI lacks is that emotion, drive, empathy, and the self-awareness. And so like, how important is intellect? Is it okay for these tools to just be used for that? How much of the job is intellect? Right, it's kind of double clicking on a lot of the stuff you've been talking about already, but just thought that framing would be useful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, one thing I like to say is the modern large language model systems are incredible simulation machines. So they can simulate empathy and they can simulate intellect, but they don't really have it. And the people in the audience might, accept that. So what do you guys think about the simulation of empathy, emotion, and intellect versus actual human?
It's interesting. There are examples which people may know of AI companions, right? Where people develop relationships with something, and there are these, I think, anecdotal reports of people reporting like, wow, this is actually kind of a fulfilling relationship. I'm skeptical because I think one thing that you identify that I think comes back to the question that I'm really interested in, which is, what is the essential human character of what we do? And I think empathy lands differently if you feel like another human is hearing you and understanding you versus some machine, right? Like the connection between human beings, maybe that's the answer. There's something about that will never be replicated because it's another human being.
But maybe you don't get your empathy the same place you get your information and action items. And maybe that's something as a society we need to get used to. Maybe.
Lois has taught me a great deal about user testing, and I think we should user test this. See if users,
We are.
you expressed this, tragedy to GPT-4, and they expressed empathy back to you. How did it feel?
I think too, in the class I teach on legal ethics, we only spend so much of the semester on the actual rules, and then we spend a chunk of time on the more intangible things. And we do an entire session on emotional intelligence, and it comes up over and over and over again how important emotional intelligence is to effective lawyering. And I think it's not just because people feel heard or they feel supported, which is of course really important and a critical part, but also because it's not until you build trust with someone and have the self-awareness to kind of read them, kind of shift based on what they're saying to really be able to intellectually help them out. And I'm thinking of, for example, like in an asylum representation, you have someone scared to death of being deported, maybe going back to a country where they fear for their life, maybe because of cultural differences, the way they're telling their story, they're omitting certain things, they're not being fully honest. They're telling a story in a strange, non-chronological fashion. And it takes that human ability to listen, to probe, to be sensitive. And it's only when you do that that you actually get the facts you need to win their case for them. And so then you can kind of switch to the intellectual side of, I think I see where this person is going with their story. I need them to reveal these facts that they don't want to reveal. When they reveal them, I'll have a much better case. And so I need to get there with them. And I don't know if that capability is there or not. But I think that's a critical part of being an effective advocate for someone is using that emotional intelligence, but then in the service of the intellectual pursuit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we've met some lawyers who also seem to be simulating empathy. Yes, over there. Yeah, right there. No, behind with the glasses. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's.
Hi, I think we made the analogy or the observation that first-year associates who've got into law school, graduated 3 years of law school, passed the bar, they're now licensed attorneys, but experienced attorneys know they know nothing. They know nothing about the actual practice of law. And so I analogize that to ChatGPT 4.0, 5.0, whatever, is that they passed the bar, aren't they good enough to be licensed attorney? The answer is no. So, they shouldn't be practicing law unsupervised. So I think another analogy would be that pharmaceutical companies, a biotech company, are issuing biotech products, but they have to be supervised by a physician. Physician has to interview, assess the needs of the client before prescribing any pharmaceutical product. So I think along those lines, I think AI should be looked upon as a pharmaceutical company that's ostensibly providing a very helpful high-tech product, should be helping people, but it still needs to be supervised by experienced professional practitioners before it's dispensed to the general public. So I think in the early stages, you're going to need a experienced, practiced, wise attorney to supervise the provision of AI services so the product is being dispensed suitably, responsibly, and professionally to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that are going to happen. And maybe eventually down the road, in certain areas like in TurboTax, you've got an AI dispensary that the providers are comfortable now. They can dispense directly to the public without any supervision in very narrow areas. But I think for a long time, you're going to need an experienced attorney in that area supervising the dispensing of AI services. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos.
So what do you think about that? This harkens back to some of Melanie's points and Emo and Lois's points, but Melanie?
I'm all for supervision.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And one point you raised, actually, incidentally, which is an interesting point, is at least the current generation of large language model technologies don't really know what they don't know reliably, which is, it might be an issue that's going to go away in the future, with different confidence levels, but that is a current weakness, such as the ChatGPT lawyer who asked the ChatGPT, are these real? And it said yes, right? It'll make something up. Let's see, over there.
Thanks. Tonight's been really interesting. One question I have is around the inputs. We've been talking a lot about the outputs of these models and AI. So a lot of the quality that we get on the output side is dependent on the quality of the input side. And when we're talking about legal aid, we're talking about people who might, English might be a second language, or the model is maybe not trained to recognize the way that person is accustomed to speaking. Is that something we should be concerned about or be thinking about as we talk about, using these for legal aid? Or is that something that it'll catch up and let's just get it out there because aid is aid?
Lois?
Yeah, I think we need to be very concerned about public-facing interfaces and how prompts are formulated. And so one thought that I've had is sort of pre-populating a list of potential prompts for the range of issues that people might have. I think that is a real issue. I think it's absolutely solvable. At least the OpenAI interface that I've played with and some of the other legal tools are not appropriate, I think, for someone who is looking for self-help. I think there are just too many challenges and too much room as the technology is at this point for error and problems. But I do think that that's solvable and a really important issue.
Yeah, and you raised some of the really good points earlier about sort of trauma-informed approaches, and to your point, I think OpenAI, we've learned, people in the AI community have learned a lot in the last 10 years that AI systems can be extremely biased, and OpenAI has done as good a job as any at sort of reducing, although not eliminating, some of that bias. But one of the problems that everyone agrees is that the training data is very largely representative of Western English-speaking society, just in terms of volume, and it's not representative of a lot of different cultures, and those kind of subtle problems still need to be addressed. So it's a great point. Yes, right here. Yeah, wait for the microphone to come in. Yeah, you. Yep.
Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating topic of conversation, and I really wanted to just expand a little bit on the point that you had made, Jason, about really this is not a democratizing force, right? And I really want to hold on to that, because when we're talking about access, we're talking about the fact that we're already dealing with a very undemocratic reality when it comes to access to tools, representation, and so forth. And we're also focusing on the interests of marginalized communities, right? The idea of technology as being a solution really, really terrifies me, largely because when we think about what lawyers do, there's client representation, but there's also, in the way that doctors are, medical doctors are doctors of the body, we're doctors of society. And we're involved in how we shape the legal system in a way that it reflects our humanity, in a way that it really connects with the needs of people. When technology does that, and also when we're talking about using technology as a way of bringing in new ideas and thinking outside of the box, but yet at the same time, we're also using tools that are essentially developed by a small percentage of people who are part of organizations with a vested financial interest, incentive, and profits. And so that right there, to me, seems like a conflict of interest when it really boils down to that humanity that is so critical to what we as lawyers do, not just in representing our clients' needs in the context of the legal system that we live in, but also in shaping the legal system in a way that it continues to align with the needs of other people. We're stewards in that sense.
Great. Does anyone want to react to that?
Yeah, I think the conflict of interest point is a really important one. There's another rule for that. And we worry about sort of divided loyalties of, are we making this tool purely in the best interest and out of loyalty to our clients or the users of these services? Or is there like a split motive of what we want these platforms to do, what money we want to make off of them? And so you could run into the situation where, let's say you have the model I proposed of like a firm or lawyer responsible for the platform, and maybe they're offering it as a tool to the public, but then they're also using it for their paying clients and they want to make money off the tool. And so whose interest do they have in mind when creating the tool? And is that creating enough that there's a significant risk of like material limitation into their loyalty for their own client, for their clients, in which case we have a problem, at least under the rules.
I think those are great, complex questions.
Yeah.
I don't have answers to.
Well, I want to emphasize your point, which was great, because if you look at what the AI tools are being developed, they're largely being developed in Silicon Valley by a very homogenous community. It doesn't look, it's not reflective of, the 340 million people in the United States as a whole. And to the extent that becomes the de facto standard and interpretations of law and legal tools, we should at least think about that more carefully and even be concerned. Yeah, Ken.
So I just thought I'd bring up one more risk. So thanks for this, by the way. So I'm a little worried, without getting into the details of how horrible AI has been on the jurisprudence side so far. Lots of great examples of where that has really screwed up everything from parole systems to recidivism rate calculations and things like that. We do have the issue that we have very heavily loaded courts. And one of the problems we have is that ChatGPT and the like are really good at generating enormous volumes of paperwork and making it much easier to file junk filings, much easier to file additional motions. That basically, if you're a lawyer and you know that if you go file 15 motions instead of 2, there's a chance one of them will stick, it could really make a mess out of the entire legal system. So I was just kind of wondering what your response to that is.
one of the concerns here is who the haves and the have-nots in our system, and one of the have-nots are our courts. Our courts do not have the resources that many of the private participants in the court system have, and I don't know if, judges are probably going to feel burdened by this technology long before they feel empowered by it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I have some friends working at the federal agencies, and already they're seeing notice and comment being overwhelmed by what are clearly AI-generated comments. So in the past, kind of a high-quality text output was a barrier to a flood of agency comments, but no longer. So it's a good point. And the other point you raised, which is really good, no matter how good the AI system is designed, how it's implemented also matters, and in some of the recidivism systems have been badly implemented for lack of expertise or for other reasons. So that's a terrific point. Khalef.
Hi, yeah, thank you. My question is mostly, I guess, for Jason. So basically at the end, your rebuttal said that the biggest difference between a ChatGPT and a real lawyer is that we have the capacity for empathy, but the ChatGPT doesn't. What if you program that into the ChatGPT itself, right? There are a lot of lawyers who are blocks, right? They don't have empathy, they don't know how to interact with human beings. And in fact, sometimes we talk about, these models being a lot more dangerous than even human beings, because by interacting with them, you anthropomorphize them, you get attached to them. So we could bring that into the picture. What happens then? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm going to riff on Emo's point, which is, and I'm sure this kind of thing is going on, which is if you have a person who doesn't know whether on the other end of the screen there is a human being or AI, can they tell the difference? And I'm sure if we're not there yet, it will get fine-tuned and programmed where a human says, wow, this is a person, this really gets me, and I really feel understood and that I'm really being heard, and it's just AI. And I mean, I don't know where that goes.
Subject of a lot of movies, I'm sure.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, to Lois, we definitely need research in this area, because there's some research that suggests people sometimes trust AI systems more for better or for worse. They might feel uncomfortable revealing, dark secrets to a human therapist that they might reveal to a system that they know to be an AI. So we need to study this. Ivan.
Ivan Portilla, I'm educator here. I'm also part of the big AI tech companies like Microsoft and IBM. And I have a simple question for you, distinguished panel. I have a kid who's a senior in high school, and he wants to be a lawyer. So I have been teaching AI tools, like natural language processing and so on. But what other skills should I teach him to differentiate him from an AI lawyer?
No one's going to have an answer. One, make sure he's tech savvy. I'm delighted that this event came together because some of us were talking and it kind of emerged out of some conversations. And I'm really wrestling with this question about what is the difference between the output and I do think that there is something about the human connection. And how, one thing that I talk to a lot of lawyers in private practice about and who are worried about being better lawyers and developing business, all that kind of thing, is pay attention to how you make people feel. And I do think that will matter. There will be lots of things, I think, where the tech output solves the problem, it serves the need, but I think for at least the foreseeable future, there's always going to be room still for lawyers who understand how the system works and its impact on the lived experience of the people they work for. I hope.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in on that. I'm not one of those people that think that the job of lawyer is going to go away as AI gets better. Lawyers will do different things as they always have in the past. And we've seen this a lot with technology. Technology tends to replace tasks more than it replaces entire jobs. And at the end of the day, a lot of lawyers are problem solvers, they're advocates, and they're advice givers to people who are having problems. And I think that will still remain in a complex world. One more question. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this tonight. It was so interesting. Professor K talked a little bit about how a bad lawyer can cause you to forfeit your rights. And I'm wondering, how do we handle when a bad AI lawyer causes someone to forfeit their rights? How do we evaluate in the interest of access to justice when someone forfeits their rights? Does that change the way, for example, that we do appeals? How do we ensure that people who have to rely on AI are still getting the same fair shake that people with human lawyers are still, in theory, getting with regard to that?
I think there are ways to apply the same tools we use for bad human lawyers, sanctions, malpractice suits. If there is someone responsible, you can sue them for malpractice and how they supervise their platform. You could get them sanctioned, and hopefully, that has a deterrent effect and a quality control effect. And so I think we first look to the mechanisms already in place to help ensure that people are getting good representation.
And then one thing I'll add is we have to compare it to what I call the advice absent baseline. So people today, 75% of people have legal problems that don't have access to lawyers, but they have to do something. So what do? They guess, they ask their friends, their family, their trusted community members, they go to Google. So they're getting bad answers today, and a lot of them, and yet they're still proceeding or not proceeding.
With no remedy.
Right, with no remedy, yeah. But it's a great point you make. But we are unfortunately out of time, so please join me in thanking my amazing panel.
Can we postpone just for a second?
Yes.
A couple concluding remarks?
Yes. Please don't
applaud. So I reserved 2 minutes of my 10 minutes at the outset. Is how I'll justify this. First, I want to call out a few folks for post-event discussion as well as possible follow-up. Chris Brown is leading the AI legal meetup on a regular basis. You guys have an event tomorrow night, right? Tomorrow night. So if you're interested in following up in this area, I direct you to follow up with Chris. Additionally, a CU alum, Otto Hansen, is behind Term Scout, which is a very interesting technology solution incorporating artificial intelligence that's analyzing contracts and comparing the fairness of their terms to other agreements. Super interesting work there. And then Paul Lippy is back here at Colorado Law in the House. And in terms of people who have been really ahead of the game in terms of technology and the law, all three of those, among others, are ringers in here. A reminder, our next event at Silicon Flatirons is going to be here November 16th, the Variety Show. And also in the spirit of the entrepreneurial community, I just found out an old friend, a longtime friend of the startup community, as well as an entrepreneur, Tom Higley, has relocated for the most part to Maine. Among other things, Tom has been involved in a really cool thing called 10-10-10. If we could give an acknowledgement of Tom's work over the years. Thank you for all you've done here, Tom. And last but not least, we've got 7 pages of notes to pour through from tonight's panel. On behalf of the Daniels Ethics Fund, Colorado Access to Justice Commission, and Silicon Flatirons, please help me thank this panel for a really, really terrific event. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a good night.